Well, the building block that was rejected became the cornerstone of the whole new world. The building block that was rejected became the cornerstone of a whole new world. When I am down and unsuspected, with a burden that does not show, I think what time has resurrected and how the sun can make the water flow. Here comes again the building block that was rejected became the cornerstone of a whole new world. The building block that was rejected became the cornerstone of a whole new world. There is a man who has collected all the sorrow in our eyes. He gives us love as God directed, but is seldom recognized. The building block that was rejected became the cornerstone of a whole new world. The building block that was rejected became the cornerstone of a whole new world. When all your dreams have been connected and your vision has been returned, remember, love, you are protected by the truth your heart has learned. The building block that was rejected became the cornerstone of a whole new world. The building block that was rejected became the cornerstone of a whole new. One more time around and sing it really loud with gusto and energy and compassion and all sorts of good things. The building block that was rejected became the cornerstone of a whole new world. The building block that was rejected became the cornerstone, became the cornerstone, became the cornerstone of a whole new world. I forgot to tell you that song was written by Noel Paul Stuckey, 1977. It was a big hit at National Youth Conference in the Colorado Rockies. National Youth in 1978. I've been singing it ever since. It's old, it's refreshing, it's lively, and it's fun. What can go wrong? Well, in the context of that song, we find these words in the 118th chapter of Psalm, and I'd like you to read it with me. It's in your bulletin for today. The stonemasons, discarded as flawed, is now the capstone. Read it with me, please. This is God's work. We rub our eyes, we can hardly believe it. This is the day God acted. Let's celebrate and be festive. And then, from 1 Peter, come, a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. Like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, well, well. Well, well. What a fascinating story in Psalm 118, which is a well-known verse, and Jesus and the psalmist were well acquainted with this very old ancient story regarding the building of Solomon's temple, and you can find all that if you want to read fairly laboriously through 1 Kings, the first 10 chapters as you read those, chapter 5 and chapter 6, there were 10,000 workers at one time who alternated, came in and went, but 10,000 workers over a period of 7 years. That's a long journey. And it so happened that the stone quarry, where they were getting all the stones, the cutters went out and cut the stone, was some distance from the site where the temple was being built. It even says in 1 Kings 6:7, when it was built and prepared at the quarry, not hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard when the temple was being built. It's a very interesting story because as they were building the temple, it seems there was this large misshapen stone that was unmarked. Don't know how the marking got off, but it was unmarked, and the workers didn't know what to do with it. They kept kicking it around. It was inconvenient. It was in the way. They stumbled over it. Where does it fit? It's a nuisance. So a worker went to the foreman, who went to the site manager, to the chief architect, all the smart people. Finally, they shouted out, "Take this stone and push it off to the side. Get that stone out of here." That's my screaming part up there in the booth. I alerted him earlier about that part. Get that stone out of here. It doesn't belong. Now, this particular piece of misshapen stone was actually the wedge stone. So the top of the arch, you have the keystone or the wedge stone, which kind of holds everything else together up there at the top. So 5, 6, 7, or 3 or 4 years later, when they were trying to finish and maybe take down the scaffolding of this structure, they looked around and said, "Oh, there's one more stone. Where is it? What happened to the stone? We can't find it anyplace." And so the workers went to the other experts, who said, "Oh, that rough-hewn piece of granite everyone kept stumbling over? Why, here it is." And let's put it in, and it fit, which ultimately became the headstone or keystone. The stone that was rejected became the head of the corner. Remember that thought. Tuck it away. Transitioning to a very personal story. Our family moved to West Central Wisconsin in 1952. Ralph, you know Ralph. We do have another brother, John. He's Ralph, John, and Joe. And during those years, we had from 2 to 4 foster children in our home that we took care of and were part of the family. They were integrated into the fabric of family life and working together. And we all went to a one-room country grade school, and all the fun that brought. Didn't learn much, but I had fun. And we all enjoyed being free-range kids long before that term ever became popular today. Truly free-range kids. Well, long about 1957, I'm really going back, stretching our imaginations back to 1957. Dad, as a preacher, bivocational minister farmer, made the invitational call, the altar call, and I went forward in that afternoon in Wolf River, which was several miles from where we lived. There's something unusual was there. Well, not usual for a farm boy, but on the farm there was a herd of cattle, and the cattle were upstream in the water. So as I went down into that muddy, chilly water, I noticed UFOs. There's that word. Now, okay, you've been thinking about it. What is a UFO? Unidentified floating objects. Okay, Jason's got it right. He gets an A. Well, after being dunked in this suspicious-looking water, making promises I hardly understood, I walked out of that water for a 60-year-long journey of constant discovery of what it meant to be a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus. What does it mean? I had no clue. And as a 12-year-old, I had no clue how starkly this baptismal water would become a metaphor for the messiness of ministry. Now, all you ordained and retired clergy and licensed ministers, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? The messiness of ministry, that's another whole sermon in itself. Well, this journey eventually led me to Bethany Theological Seminary in 1973 with a determination that I would never, ever become a minister. Wow, yeah, really, never, never. It seems that my room is right above my parents', and I could listen to my parents chat through the hot air register at night when I was to be sleeping, and I felt their agony. As they talked about church life and how painful it was, because they really didn't have the capacity to think about it wasn't their problem, it was other people's problems, but they kind of took it on as their own. And I heard that, felt that. And then I went to a church council meeting a couple times, and one council meeting, Dad wanted to get a $100 raise from $1,100 to $1,200 per year. Well, people came out of the woodwork to vote that down. I said, who are all these people? Oh, they're members, and they can vote. They voted it down. Have any idea what the next vote was on that agenda? Any idea at all? The next vote was to set aside $10,000 to remodel the church, put a basement under the church. It was an old wood structure, didn't have a basement. $10,000. And I thought, wow, whoever wants to be in ministry and receive that kind of treatment. Well, when I went to seminary, a miracle occurred, truly a miracle, because I told people I'll never be a minister. Don't talk to me. I know how you take these Master of Arts and Theology people and you transform them. You know, you got to be in ministry. You got to have a Master of Divinity degree, really, because you really want to be a minister. You got to do that. And I said, no, 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 no. And I recounted all the heartaches. After 9 months of challenge by faculty, staff, and students, they cautioned me very carefully and gently not to base my future ministry possibilities on the negative experiences that were shared by my parents, but rather I was encouraged to embrace the giftedness within. You follow me on that one? It was a discerning community of faith that identified gifts for ministry much the same way our ministry calling committee functions. You know, as I've been around the denomination in a variety of ways, you've got the best, well thought of plan for calling, caring, nurturing people into ministry. Excellent plan. And so the past 42 years of ministry have included, well, the end of that was at that end of 9 months, I could see myself in no other place but in pastoral ministry. It included 2 churches for many, many years, also serving in the national office, coordinating Brethren Volunteer Service, and Heidi Loomis, who's here today, was one of my trusted partners in that venture. Glad to have you here. and 14 years as a district executive. Well, during these years, I mostly treasured the opportunity to serve the wider church family, but let me tell you, ministry was not always easy, but I'm telling you, ministry is seldom boring. You got that? It's seldom boring. Now, I want you to consider these two contrasting images that I've noticed, and perhaps you've noticed as well as you've been around. I've seen firsthand on many levels of the church an erosion of loyalty to the Church of the Brethren, its beliefs, practices, and its principles. I've witnessed painful church divisions over issues of leadership. I've experienced, not only witnessed, the dark side, the underbelly of church life, when persons and personalities clashed and have become polarized over issues of theology, social issues, human sexuality, militarism, issues of finance, and yes, there even been church splits over worship styles. Imagine that. However, I've also seen a multitude of persons who do cherish the church and its core values and its beliefs and its practices, and I've witnessed a host of dedicated persons who provide significant ministry for volunteerism, for district and denominational ministries and related agencies of the Church of the Brethren. I have had the pleasure and the joy of experiencing healthy congregational life, much like we experience here at Elizabethtown. Thank goodness. You see, in the Church of the Brethren, we have an abundance of opportunities for mission work, disaster relief, and Brethren volunteer service engagements. Yes, I would agree that there are many people who are cynical about the state of the church at the present time. And many in the church just can't seem to move beyond the politics of human sexuality and constant disagreements over biblical authority. And yet, I ponder, what would be some additional avenues of hope that would guide our beloved denomination into new adventures of faithful living, providing strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow? As our beloved hymn, "Great is Thy Faithfulness," suggests. You might think in your own life as you experience church life, what hope do you have for the church? We talked about that in Sunday school class this morning. What avenues of hope do you see for the Church of the Brethren, for this church? Well, back to the farm, here's a very modest proposal. Remember that stone that was rejected? Came the head of the corner. Ralph, I don't know about you and your experience on the farm. Since we're 5 years apart, your experience is a little bit different, but I'm telling you, one of the things that I hated the most, besides pitching manure, milking the cows, fixing fence, was picking rock, picking stone. Each year, the frost brought up a new crop of stones in a field that was near the woods, about a 30-acre field. And so the entire family went out and picked stones from dawn to dusk between the milking of the cows and all that other work, fist-sized rocks, small boulders size of one's head. We filled a large wagon about a foot deep, and each time we loaded that, we trucked it off with John Deere tractor to the side of the field near the woods, and by hand we threw them all off into the rock pile. Now, these are my teenage years. So what do you think I felt about this task? I hated it. It was a real nuisance. The stones were a nuisance. I didn't like it. I complained about the drudgery of the task to my dad, who would firmly say, very gently, "You know, son, someday we're going to need those stones. They might be useful someday. Well, Dad had a bigger vision, you see. Isn't that true in life, that moms and dads and aunts and uncles and grandparents, you all have bigger visions? You've seen more. You've had more experiences. You can give perspective on things. Well, okay. Guess what happened? What happened? I know you're already there. What happened? Because a year or so later, Dad hitched up the John Deere tractor to the wagon, and we all went out to the rock pile, and we started picking those rocks up from the rock pile and putting them in the wagon, and we loaded them and hauled them back to the barnyard. And there we mixed these rocks with cement and gravel and rebar to form a solid foundation for a 40-foot silo, a garage, a corn crib, and 2 pole barns. Imagine what I had rejected as worthless and being a nuisance became an important recycled ingredient in forming the foundation and support system for essential farm buildings. Any farmers out there? Anyone related to farming, you know what I'm talking about. The stumbling stones became building blocks. Recall the song? The building block that was rejected became the cornerstone for a whole new world. So, when I think about the present state of the church, I can't help thinking about these formative years. That which I disliked and thought inconvenient, something of little value. Dad had a bigger plan. Surely God has bigger plans for God's church. Surely God has a bigger plan for the future of the church. The cornerstone referenced in the scripture was a direct metaphor for Jesus, who was rejected by mortals and yet made the chief cornerstone by God. Repeatedly in the scripture, we find that God takes that which others regarded as inconvenient and unclean and sinful and unworthy and broken and useless stumbling blocks and transforms them into things of beauty, precious and holy. Recall hard-headed Peter. Remember that in, I think it was Acts chapter 11, when he had went back to Jerusalem, and there was this vision, and 3 times a sheet came down from heaven, all filled with all kinds of goodies, and Peter said, "Not gonna eat that, unclean, not gonna eat that." 3 times the sheet came down, and God, 3 times he rejected, and 3 times God had to remind Peter, God commanded, "What God has cleansed, you will not call unclean." What God has made clean, you will not call unclean. Now think about that. And then think about Jesus and how Jesus, in his 3 short years of ministry, extended a hand of healing and care and reconciliation and compassion and friendship to the least of these, women and children, to the homeless, the diseased, the outcasts of society, people who others felt were stumbling blocks in the way. But Jesus embraced these outcasts of society, these inconvenient stones, stumbling blocks, and transformed these people into things of beauty, precious, and lovely in God's sight. You know, one of the things that infuriated the Pharisees so greatly We find the story in Matthew 21 when the audacity of Jesus to proclaim that the harlots, the publicans, the sinners, the Gentiles were getting into head of people in the kingdom before the Jews' own children. The Jews' children, yeah. Matthew 21, 31 to 32. And later in John chapter 21, verse 19, the Pharisees, remember what they were saying to each other? They were so upset that all these people were flocking off to follow Jesus and follow his way. They said, "Look, the world has gone after him, and we can do nothing." The world has gone after him, and we can do nothing. Well, perhaps an exaggeration, but something to exaggerate about. Well, now here's the question to ponder. Take home some messages. As the church continues to struggle with the present-day challenges that it faces, and there are many, do we reject these inconvenient stones that the cultural frost brings to the surface each year, and do we relegate them to the rock pile outside the church? Let's think about that. Or do we welcome these stones, as it were, as an essential part of the conversation that surround the formation of our faith, bound and strengthened by the unifying spirit, perhaps called the glue of the Spirit, to bring us together? Is that what we do with these inconvenient issues? You know, the New Testament highlighted in our lesson for today this contrast in 1 Peter. Come, be a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. Like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house. Perhaps somewhere in your own life, in the recesses of your memory, you have felt like you've been on the fringes of family, of life. Perhaps you're new to Brethren Volunteer Service. I know when I was a volunteer, and there's many people here have been in BVS. On your project, it's been a very lonely experience for the first time. Perhaps you felt unwelcomed even in the church, of all places. And what happens? You felt like a stone cast aside, and some kind soul comes up to you and embraces you and says, "You are welcome. You are loved, and I don't care where you are on your journey of faith, I'm with you. I'll walk with you. I will embrace you, and I will welcome you into the care of the family of faith." What a powerful imagery for including those which the world and other places have cast aside. Welcome. Now, on the one hand, we can be very thankful for the legacy of compassion and service for all of the precious children God sends to our doors, peace, service, and openness to all. In the Church of the Brethren, we have excelled in our ministries of care and compassion for the refugee, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, children, caring for children, responding to natural disasters, and a host of peace and service ministries that truly reflect the compassion of Christ. And yet, let's be really honest about our life together. As a denomination, we have not been very successful in welcoming our LGBTQ neighbors into our circle of care. Though rejected by mortals, precious in God's sight. We have not been very successful or faithful in recognizing the spiritual gifts and creative energies such persons could share as fully integrated members in the fabric of our communities. The amended Human Sexuality paper of 1983, recall that is now 36 years old, comes very close to relegating our LGBTQ sisters and brothers to the rock heap outside the church, when we severely limit their participation within the life of the congregation's district and denominational ministries, implying a very unspoken but real second-class citizenship, membership. You see, the challenge as I see it in this church's response section of the paper suggests that one's identity as LGBTQ person is a lifestyle option, somehow a choice, rather than recognize one's own sexual identity as a gift from God. For these people, it's either be celibate or convert. No other option. Just imagine someone said to you, you be celibate or you convert, because everything else is wrong. Though rejected by mortals, yet precious in God's sight. Incidentally, there are out of 1,000 congregations, approximately 46 out of 1,000 who have signed on to the Welcoming and Affirming Support Communities Network. And while Elizabethtown has not yet taken that step, we certainly have lived that out in our actions. Well, two pondering questions. Here's the take-home message for you. Two questions to ponder as we strive to think about what is God calling us to do as we wrestle with weighty, stone-like issues of the day. And my hunch is you can name them one by one, but I want to give credit to dear Earl Fike Jr., who was a pastor here some years ago, former moderator, national staff. I'm not sure where I read this, but I'm certain that he said it. How can we conduct ourselves in our churches, our districts, and annual conference that display our best understanding of what the New Testament would expect of us as members of a community of faith? How do we conduct ourselves in ways that display our best understanding of what the New Testament is telling us to do? Secondly, how do we hold, and this is the hard one, we talked about it in Sunday school class this morning, how do we hold one another in love and fellowship in moments of gentle agreement and vigorous challenge? How do we as a church reclaim the richness of biblical forbearance? Biblical forbearance. I think these are important questions because the answer will determine how we worship together, how we serve one another, and how we welcome those whom God sends to us, and how we do business in all levels of the church. Another quote from Earl Fike Jr. I sincerely believe that this is important because how we treat each other will determine how much, to the extent which we are being guided by the work of the Holy Spirit. What may seem like stones, remember those stones? Or issues of inconvenience may become and have the potential for becoming living stones that have the possibilities within them to provide richness and texture and support to strengthen the bond of brethren together, even in our most vigorous conversations. I would agree that this is a difficult time in the life of the Church of the Brethren, even in the midst of our discovering a compelling vision for the denomination. But I believe God calls, even commands, that we prove our love for God in the character of our relationships to our sisters and brothers, even in moments of disagreement. These are actions that give Christians hope in a challenging world because of the hope that is within us. 1 Peter 3:15, the hope that is within us. The hope that is within us. Church, as followers of Christ's way, we can do no other. We can do no other. Amen. We can do